There is a wooden box sitting in the corner of a farmhouse kitchen in Holmes County, Ohio. It is plain, unpolished, about the size of a large microwave. There is no cord coming out of it, no dial, no display, nothing that requires electricity, gas, or any ongoing fuel to operate. And inside it, right now, a pot of beans that was brought to a boil this morning is still cooking. It is 9 o'clock at night. That box is called a fireless cooker. The Amish communities of Lancaster County and Holmes County have used a version of it for generations. The principle behind it is over 200 years old on the American continent and significantly older in Europe. The United States Department of Agriculture's own National Agricultural Library has published a documented history of the fireless cooker, tracing its formal introduction to the United States to the mid-1800s, and noting that it was commercially manufactured and popular in the early 20th century before disappearing from American kitchens. It cost approximately $25 in materials to build. It runs on one initial flame. It cooks a full pot of food while you sleep, while you work, while you do anything else entirely. And the reason it vanished from American kitchens in the mid-20th century follows the same pattern as several other methods covered on this channel. Let us start with what this actually is, because the name fireless cooker is sometimes confused with other things. A fireless cooker is an insulated box. That is the complete description. You bring food to a full rolling boil on your existing stove, using whatever fuel source you already have. Then you transfer the covered pot, still at boiling temperature, into a tightly insulated container. The insulation prevents the heat from escaping. The food continues to cook slowly, using only the thermal energy it already contains. No additional fuel, no additional heat source, just time and insulation doing the work your stove was doing before. The Aprovecho Research Center, a nonprofit organization that has studied energy-efficient cooking technologies for decades, published data confirming that retained heat cooking can save between 20 and 80% of the fuel ordinarily required for cooking, depending on the food being cooked, the design of the insulated container, and how quickly the pot is transferred after boiling. That is a verified range from a documented source, not a marketing claim. The USDA National Agricultural Library documents that a flurry of publications authored by United States Department of Agriculture employees appeared in the 1910s, specifically describing the fireless cooker and advocating its use by homemakers. The syllabus for the illustrated lecture on the homemade fireless cooker was published by the USDA in 1914. The fireless cooker was not a fringe idea. It was federally promoted as a practical, energy-saving kitchen technology. The physics behind it is straightforward. When you bring a pot of food to a boil, the contents of that pot hold a significant amount of thermal energy. Dense foods such as dried beans, thick stews, whole grains, and root vegetables hold heat particularly well. If you place that pot immediately into a tightly insulated environment, that stored heat continues to drive the cooking process without any additional input. The food temperature drops slowly over many hours then rapidly, as it would in open air. Given sufficient initial temperature and sufficient insulation quality, the food continues cooking to completion. Now the sand element. Because the Amish version of this system, and the version most closely associated with the term sand oven, uses sand rather than hay or wool as the primary insulating and heat transfer medium. Sand has a specific heat capacity of approximately 800 joules per kilogram per degree Celsius, which is the measure of how much energy a material can store per unit of mass per degree of temperature change. This is roughly double the specific heat capacity of air and comparable to many common solid materials. When hot sand surrounds a hot pot, the sand absorbs heat from the pot and then releases it back slowly over time, moderating the rate of temperature loss. The sand acts as both an insulator and a thermal reservoir simultaneously. The practical design used in Amish households and documented in historical sources on Pennsylvania German domestic practice is a wooden crate lined on the interior with sheet metal or tin. Clean, dry sand fills the crate to a depth that allows a cast iron pot to be nested into it with sand reaching to the rim of the lid. A heavy wooden top closes the box, That is the complete build. The dimensions documented in historical fireless cooker guides suggest an interior box of approximately 18 inches wide by 18 inches deep by 14 inches tall as a practical size for a standard cooking pot. A wooden crate from a wine shop, a hardware store, or built from 3/4-inch plywood achieves this. Aluminum flashing or thin galvanized sheet metal, available at any hardware store, lines the inside to prevent sand from working through gaps in the wood over time. Washed silica sand, sold at building supply stores for under $7 for a 50-pound bag, fills the box. 2 bags is generally sufficient for a box of this size. One critical preparation step that determines whether the system works properly. The sand must be completely dry before use. Wet sand conducts heat differently than dry sand and can introduce steam into the cooking environment. Spread the sand on a flat surface in sunlight for 2 days, or spread it on a baking sheet and bake it in your kitchen oven at 250 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour. This drives out residual moisture and is the single step most commonly skipped by first-time builders. The build itself is simple enough to complete in 1 afternoon using basic tools. The liner is cut and folded from aluminum flashing and fitted to the interior walls of the box. Sand is added to create a base layer deep enough to support the pot. The pot is nested in, and sand is packed around and up to the rim. The lid, which can be a simple piece of plywood with a folded quilted pad or a thick wool blanket on top, is placed over the box. The combination of sand around the sides and bottom and insulation across the top creates a closed thermal environment. Total materials cost for a first build, including the plywood or crate, aluminum flashing, and 2 bags of sand, runs between $20 and $30 depending on local prices. If you already own a cast iron Dutch oven, which is the ideal cooking vessel for this method due to its mass and tight-fitting lid, your cost is the box and the sand only. Now the food safety element, because this is the part of the fireless cooker conversation that matters most, and is the part most commonly either understated or ignored entirely. The United States Department of Agriculture Food Safety and Inspection Service defines the temperature danger zone as the range between 40 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Within this range, harmful bacteria can double in number in as little as 20 minutes. Any cooking method that allows food to spend extended time within this range creates a food safety risk. The fireless cooker works safely when 2 conditions are met. First, the food must reach a full, vigorous rolling boil before transfer. A full boil means the contents have reached 212 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level. This initial temperature must be high enough that the food remains above 140 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the intended cooking period. Second, the food must be consumed promptly after the cooking period is complete, not held indefinitely in the box at declining temperatures. The foods best suited to retained heat cooking are those that require long, low-temperature cooking times and have high thermal mass. Dried beans, lentils, whole oats, barley, wheat berries, thick stews, and bone broths are ideal. These foods cook slowly by design. They hold heat well because of their density and water content, and their cooking process benefits from the gradual temperature decline that retained heat cooking provides. Whole dried beans brought to a hard boil for 15 minutes and then transferred to a well-insulated sandbox will reach full tenderness in 6 to 8 hours. Foods that should not be cooked in a fireless cooker without careful temperature monitoring include those with poultry, which require sustained high temperatures to eliminate pathogen risk, and any recipe where the initial volume of food is small relative to the insulated space, reducing thermal retention efficiency. When in doubt, a food thermometer inserted into the pot after the cooking period should confirm the contents remain above 140 degrees Fahrenheit before serving. This is not optional advice. It is the USDA's documented food safety standard. The Aprovecho Research Center and Haybox cooking guides, published across multiple organizations, note that this safety concern is the most important variable in retained heat cooking, and they emphasize that the method is very well suited to the dense, long cooking foods listed above, while requiring more care with smaller portions or less dense ingredients. The historical record of this method in American kitchens is both well documented and instructive about why it disappeared. Fireless cookers were commercially manufactured and sold in the United States in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. The United States War Department investigated the hay stove as a method of providing hot food to soldiers in the field in 1905. According to an article published in the Ohio Farmer, the University of Wisconsin published a bulletin titled Fireless Cooker in 1908. The Fireless Cookbook, containing 250 recipes and instructions for building your own unit, was published in New York in 1909. By the 1930s and 40s, the Rural Electrification Administration was running power lines into rural American farmhouses. The major appliance manufacturers of that era, whose products required electricity or gas to function, had a direct commercial interest in convincing American households that the electric range and the modern stove were the only appropriate cooking technologies. Extension service curricula shifted accordingly. By the 1960s, the fireless cooker had nearly vanished from American domestic practice. The Amish communities of Lancaster County and Holmes County never went through that transition. They did not electrify their kitchens. They did not adopt electric ranges. They continued using the methods that had been in use before the electrification push: the sand, oven, the retained heat cooker. The method the rest of America set aside stayed in active use in those communities without interruption. Here is how to begin this weekend, using tools and materials available at any hardware store right now. Start with a wooden crate from a wine or liquor store. Most stores give them away. If yours does not, build a simple box from 3/4-inch plywood using 4 screws per side. Interior dimensions should be at least 16 inches wide, 16 inches deep, and 12 inches tall. Cut aluminum flashing to fit the interior walls, bottom, and lid, and secure it with short screws or construction adhesive. Add your dried sand to a depth of 4 inches on the bottom. Your first cook should be something forgiving. Steel-cut oats are the traditional starting point cited in retained heat cooking literature. 2 cups of oats, 5 cups of water, a pinch of salt, brought to a vigorous boil for 15 minutes in a covered cast iron pot. Transfer the pot immediately to the sand box. Nestle it into the sand. Pack sand up to the rim of the lid. Close the wooden top. 8 hours later, the oats will be fully cooked. The cooking energy that would have kept your stove or slow cooker running for 8 hours was delivered in 15 minutes of boiling. The sand held the heat. Your stove was off the entire time. 1 box, $25 in materials. A method documented by the USDA in 1914 and practiced in Amish kitchens without interruption through the present day. The slow cooker sitting on your kitchen counter runs at roughly 200 watts continuously for 8 hours. That is 1.6 kilowatt hours per use. At current average electricity rates from the Energy Information Administration of 17 cents per kilowatt hour, that is approximately 27 cents per slow cooker meal. Over 365 uses per year, that is just under $100 annually paid to your utility company to do what a wooden box of sand does without drawing a single watt after the initial boil. The box does not break down. It does not require a service call. It does not have a power cord to replace. The sand, once dried and in place, needs no maintenance. Subscribe to the Homestead Code. Every video on this channel covers a verified, historically documented method built for the home you already own. Drop a comment below and tell us what you would cook first in a sand oven. We read everyone.